I've taken almost 10,000 frames with the Sony RX1R Mark III. Is it really worth $5,000? I had the Sony RX1R Mark III for about a week, and within that time, I photographed my own family, 3 portrait sessions, and a family documentary. And even recorded a little bit of video with it. So I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of what the camera can do. I know what its limitations are, and I know the areas where it shines. Now, outside of my use with the Sony RX1R Mark III, my normal everyday carry camera is the Sony a7C-R. So in my head, when I'm judging a feature or the camera size, that's sort of like my baseline for comparison. And when I say this camera is small, it's like small, but in all the good ways and none of the bad. Whenever I think about small cameras, I instantly think about bad ergonomics, just because usually it's hard to like hold and maneuver like this tiny little camera. But with the RX1R Mark III, while still being very small, it actually is kind of easy to hold with one hand, which is one of my biggest complaints with cameras like the Leica Q3. While that camera is also pretty small for what it is, because of its size, weight, and build, it's almost impossible to use one-handed without any type of like extra grip accessories. But what I think saves the RX1R Mark III is that little nub on the back paired with the texture of the camera. This little hump gave me just enough extra grip while still being minimal and not adding any bolt to the camera. If and only if I was using the autofocus paired with the shutter. So while I primarily use back button focus, the act of needing my thumb to press and like hold a button for the autofocus removed just enough grip to make it feel a little less comfortable when using one-handed. But when I could use my thumb entirely for grip, then it felt perfectly fine to one-handed shoot. I also wish that Sony let you program the autofocus with shutter function to one of the memory dials. That way I could have like dial 1 for my regular shooting, and then I could simply turn dial 2 when I wanted autofocus tied to the shutter button for one-handed shooting. But for some reason, that's not one of the settings that can be saved to a memory slot. Now, in terms of use, I did find the RX1R Mark III was not as good as my a7C-R in terms of focusing, but to the point that it's kind of hard to figure out exactly why, because the focus speed was fast, the tracking worked really well, but it just felt a little slower, or the tracking wasn't as sticky in certain situations. So like most of the time it was on par with the a7C-R, but then sometimes it wasn't. And one of the biggest complaints about this camera is the fact that they used an older lens design, which for me, I actually like that they use a lens with a bit of character. But even still, I do wish they would have at least updated the focusing motor. And I have zero clue what goes into the design and build of a lens like this, but I would have been totally fine with having like the exact same lens, but with the new motors found in like a modern Sony lens. Because as is, the step motor could potentially be the source for the slower autofocus performance, and I was able to hear the motor sort of like stepping around during general use. That said, the speed and accuracy of the autofocus was still plenty fast for anything that I'd use this camera to photograph. Touching back on the size, while I can appreciate that this is the smallest full frame camera like in existence, and that is a very important sort of like accolade for Sony to be able to claim, I would have been fine with a little bit of a size increase in order to afford some more added features and functionality. For example, I really wish that this camera had the larger FC100 battery, because battery life was the biggest issue and concern while using this camera, primarily because it was a loaner camera, so I only had the one battery that it came with. And while a battery might last you a day if you're out like casually shooting, I was using this camera pretty heavily all day, every day, like for the entire week straight. So pretty much anytime I sat down to drive, eat, sleep, I had the camera plugged in. And interestingly, the area where the battery and memory card live inside the camera could easily hold a full-size FC100 battery had the memory card slot been moved to another spot. And if Sony had made this their first camera with internal memory, I don't think it would have required that much of a size increase for the body to house something like maybe an internal 512 plus maybe a micro SD card slot for backup. And I'd have been fine with even just the internal memory if I was able to afford, the full size battery. I also would have happily accepted a bit of a size bump to accommodate a tilt screen. The fact that the Sony RX1R Mark II had a tilt screen makes it feel like Sony made a big sacrifice for a little gain in terms of size. And the small size of this camera with a tilt screen would have been an absolute dream, because I actually discovered a sort of new way for me to hold the camera and take those sort of like waist level, discreet kind of street photography style images. Because the lens is so small, I can fit the lens between my pointer and middle finger, while the base of the camera sort of sit on my like ring finger pinky. In this position, my thumb perfectly rests on the shutter button. And while I was still able to sort of manage a view of the screen like down low, a tilt screen would have made this technique absolutely perfect. When it came to portraits, the ability to use a leaf shutter paired with off-camera flash was definitely helpful. I could use a nice high shutter speed to lower my ambient in order to pull off some more dramatic images. That said, I do wish that the max 1/4000th of a shutter speed was reachable at f2 instead of being limited to f5.6. Even when photographing in natural light, I found that I couldn't take pictures at f2 because of the 1/2000th shutter speed was just letting in too much light. So I found myself having to stop down in some full light situations. Speaking of stopping down, this is an area where I found a weird, reaction. When you're stopped down to something like, say, f8, you get your normal exposure preview like any recent camera would show you. So you can see like your exposure as well as your depth of field. But as soon as you start to focus, the lens opens up to f2. Not a huge deal in a lot of circumstances aside from losing your depth of field preview. But where this becomes an issue is outside in full sunlight, because when the lens opens to f2, you no longer have enough shutter speed to give you an exposure preview, which a lot of the time was the reason I was stopping down in the first place, right? Because there was too much light, so I needed to stop down. Not only does this cause the viewfinder or screen to go bright, dark as you press the shutter button, but while shooting, I found myself making adjustments too fast, not realizing I was making adjustments based on the image preview while I was focusing instead of the actual exposure preview that it would have showed me had I not been focusing. So there is a bit of an annoyance here while shooting, as well as a bit of a learning curve. Another big complaint is the lack of in-body stabilization. And yes, this would have been a nice to have, but in my opinion, not overly needed, especially given the size and the leaf shutter. It was pretty easy for me to handhold images at like 1/4 of a second. And had they made a sacrifice on the camera size to add something, I'd prefer the flip screen or the bigger battery. Now, the biggest question of them all, is this camera worth the $5,000 price tag? For most people, probably not. So if you see this camera, look at the specs, and then look at the price and think to yourself, hell no, then this camera just isn't for you, which is totally fine. It wasn't designed for the masses. But there are a lot of people that see this camera, look at the specs, and they look at the price, and they're like, yes, this makes sense, add to cart. Where I stand is kind of somewhere in the middle. This camera update has been on my wish list for years. At every Sony event I've ever been to where I have access to talk with Sony engineers, I have always asked for an update to the RX1R. And at a Sony event last year, an engineer actually asked me what I would like to see in an updated RX1R. And my exact answer was that I would be totally fine if nothing on the camera changed, but we got an updated sensor and an update to the autofocus. And that's almost what we got. Because for me, the biggest holdup paired with the price is the lack of a tilt screen. I was able to get by without the tilt screen during my time with the camera, and I think I could get by without it if I actually own the camera as well, but I'm not sure I'm willing to make that sacrifice at the current price point. But at this current price point, if it had a tilt screen, I'd have already purchased one. Now, all that said and done, I sent this camera back to Sony and I miss it. Like, I still wish I had it. And my A7C-R is by no means a slouch and even checks more boxes in terms of what I look for in a camera. But I thoroughly enjoy the smaller size of the RX1R Mark III, and I wouldn't totally be surprised if I accidentally click the buy now button sometime in the future. Editor's note here, and happy accident that I'm wearing the same t-shirt. But I recorded this video a few weeks ago after I had to send back my loaner camera. And I since then got super busy, and so I'm just now finishing the video. But within that time, I actually did end up buying the camera. I was able to, sort of mentally figure out what it was that I wanted or needed or desired out of getting a new camera, and I did end up making the purchase. So this is my current everyday carry camera setup. That said, I do still have the same wishes of, I wish there was internal memory. I wish that it had a tilt screen. I wish it had a bigger battery. But with all that, this is still the camera for me. For those curious, my current setup, I have some accessories on here that have helped me with the camera as well. So I currently have the IBIS grip on here, which has solved one of the issues that I had with one-handed shooting and needing my thumb to use back button focus, because with the new grip, I feel comfortable holding this and not needing my thumb to grip. That said, I do wish that there was still a way for me to tie autofocus to the shutter within the memory functionality. From there, I did upgrade the camera strap from my regular kind of like homemade camera strap that I used to use to this owl crown adjustable flat rope strap. This thing has been amazing. I found that with the smaller setup that I did wish to have a sort of neck carry setup, but I didn't like the look of a lot of the adjustable camera straps because it just didn't feel and look right with a camera like this. So this is a nice flat rope strap that I have found that, it's adjustable so I can wear it as a neck strap, but all I have to do is just pull on these ropes and I can lengthen it to become a shoulder carry or crossbody. So that's been amazing. I also did pick up the owl crown matte black shutter release as well. But yeah, again, let me know in the comments what you guys think. If you have any questions, also drop those in the comments. And if you want to keep up with me, obviously you can do that here on YouTube by like, comment, subscribe. You can also follow me over on Instagram. That would be amazing. And if you want to check out some more premium content from me, definitely check out the link to my Patreon, where I walk through a bunch of lighting demos, edit deconstructions, and things like that. So with that, catch you on the next one.